I'm staring at the face of the man who's supposed to be dead. Or at least, that's what the FBI poster in my break room says, and his hand is currently gripping my wrist so tight I can feel my pulse hammering against his palm, like a trapped bird throwing itself against cage bars, desperate and frantic, and utterly futile. "You didn't see my face, Dr. Reeves," he says, and his voice is like gravel wrapped in the finest silk, rough and smooth all at once, the kind of voice that could order someone's death over breakfast and seduce a saint before dinner. And right now it's making every nerve ending in my body light up with a primal warning that screams, "Danger, danger, run." "Tell me you understand." The thing is, I do understand. Probably better than he thinks I do. Because I spent the last 45 minutes with my fingers in his mouth, close enough to smell the expensive cologne mixed with copper penny blood, close enough to see the way his jaw clenched when I hit a nerve, close enough to notice things that a terrified woman probably shouldn't notice about the man who just forced his way into her dental practice with a gun-shaped bulge under his jacket, and desperation carved into every hard line of his devastatingly brutal face. I noticed the scar that runs along his jawline, like someone tried to slit his throat, and only partially succeeded, leaving behind a silvery reminder of mortality on skin that otherwise seems carved from marble and moonlight. I noticed the way his storm-gray eyes tracked my every movement with the focused intensity of a predator watching prey, calculating distances and angles and escape routes, even while I was elbow-deep in his mouth with a dental mirror and an explorer probe. I noticed the watch on his wrist, Patek Philippe, the kind that costs more than my entire year's salary, scratched and worn like he actually wears it instead of keeping it in a safe. I noticed everything, catalogued it all with the clinical detachment that 4 years of dental school and 3 years of practice have beaten into my brain, because when you're scared out of your mind, sometimes the only thing you can do is focus on the details, the small observable facts that keep you anchored to reality, when reality has suddenly shifted into something that feels more like a crime thriller than your actual life. My practice is small, modest, the kind of neighborhood dental office that takes insurance and stays open late on Thursdays for the working families in this corner of Brooklyn who can't take time off during regular business hours, which is exactly why I was here at 9 o'clock at night, finishing up paperwork and sterilizing instruments, when the front door burst open hard enough to make the bell chime sound less like a welcome and more like a warning. He was bleeding. I noticed that immediately. A thin trail of crimson running from the corner of his mouth down his chin, and the logical, professional part of my brain immediately started diagnosing trauma to the oral cavity, possible fractured tooth, definite laceration to the gingival tissue, while the terrified human part of my brain was screaming at me to run, to grab my phone, to do literally anything except what I actually did, which was stand there frozen like a rabbit in headlights while he locked the door behind him and turned those cold, calculating eyes on me with an expression that somehow managed to be both apologetic and absolutely unyielding at the same time. "I need a dentist," he had said, and the absurdity of the statement coming from a man who looked like he'd just walked out of a war zone would have made me laugh if I weren't so utterly terrified, if my hands weren't shaking so badly that I had to clasp them together to hide the tremor, if my heart weren't trying to punch its way out of my ribcage with enough force to crack bone. "I'll pay whatever you want, cash, but it needs to be now, and it needs to be off the books, and when I leave here tonight, you're going to forget you ever saw me, understand?" I should have said no, should have told him to get out, should have triggered the panic button that my practice manager insisted I install under the reception desk after that incident 6 months ago when a patient high on something showed up demanding painkillers, but instead I found myself nodding, found myself leading him back to the treatment room, found myself pulling on fresh gloves with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling, no matter how many deep breaths I took. Professional training is a strange thing, because it can override even the most basic survival instincts, can make you put your hands in a dangerous man's mouth because he's bleeding and in pain, and you took an oath once upon a time in an auditorium full of people in white coats. An oath that didn't include any clauses about, unless the patient is clearly a criminal, who probably got injured doing something illegal, and is definitely going to kill you if you call the police. The bullet had grazed his back molar, I discovered once I got him in the chair and angled the overhead light to illuminate the damage. a clean slice through the enamel that exposed the dentin underneath and explained both the bleeding and the barely suppressed agony I could see tightening the corners of his eyes even though his body remained absolutely still, controlled, disciplined in a way that spoke of extensive practice at enduring pain without showing it. The surrounding gum tissue was torn and swollen, and as I worked, irrigating, applying topical anesthetic, carefully examining the extent of the damage, I let myself fall into the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and treatment. Let the clinical part of my brain take over because it was so much easier than thinking about the reality of my situation. So much safer than acknowledging that I was currently performing emergency dental work on a man who had quite possibly just been shot at, who was armed and dangerous and looking at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness every time our eyes accidentally met. He didn't make a sound during the entire procedure, not when I injected the local anesthetic, not when I had to debride the damaged tissue, not when I placed the temporary filling that would have to do until he could get proper treatment from whatever black market dentist criminals probably have on retainer for exactly these situations. His breathing stayed even and controlled. His hands remained relaxed on the armrests instead of clenching into the white-knuckled fists that most patients reflexively form when experiencing dental pain. And his eyes never left my face except for that one moment when he turned his head slightly to the left, exposing the side of his neck. And that's when I saw it. The tattoo, black ink stark against his pale skin, a serpent crowned with what looked like orthodox cross designs winding down from behind his ear to disappear beneath his collar. My hands froze mid-motion, the saliva ejector still in his mouth, because I knew that symbol. Had seen it before in a documentary I watched 3 months ago when I couldn't sleep and fell down a late-night rabbit hole about organized crime, about the Russian mafia families that had embedded themselves into the fabric of American cities, about the violent territorial wars and the brutal code of honor, and the crowned serpent that represented the Volkov Bratva, one of the most powerful and dangerous criminal organizations in the Northeast. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins, turned my blood to slush, and my legs to rubber. And I must have made some kind of sound, a gasp, a whimper, something that betrayed my sudden understanding, because his hand shot up and caught my wrist, not painfully but firmly, a grip that communicated absolute control and the futility of resistance without causing any actual harm. "Finish the work, Dr. Reeves," he had said, and the use of my name sent fresh terror spiraling through my chest, because of course he knew my name. It's on the door, and the business cards, and the framed degree on the wall. But hearing it in his mouth felt like a threat and a promise all wrapped together in that gravel silk voice, felt like he was telling me that he knew exactly who I was, and where to find me and everyone I loved if I did anything stupid like try to run or scream or call for help. "We're almost done here, and then I'll leave, and we'll both go on with our lives like this never happened, yes?" So I finished, completed the temporary restoration with shaking hands and professional precision, gave him care instructions that he probably wouldn't follow, and a prescription for antibiotics that he definitely wouldn't fill at any legitimate pharmacy. And the entire time I was screaming inside my own head, a constant loop of panic and disbelief because this couldn't be happening, couldn't be real. I was just a dentist, just a normal woman who paid her taxes and called her mother every Sunday and had never even gotten a speeding ticket. And now I was somehow involved in something that felt like it belonged in a movie, not in my actual life. When I finally stepped back and told him we were done, he rose from the chair with the fluid grace of someone whose body is a weapon he's trained extensively in using, pulled a money clip from his pocket, and counted out $5,000 in crisp hundreds that he laid on the counter like it was nothing, like it was pocket change, like he hadn't just paid me nearly 10 times what the procedure would normally cost. Which brings me back to now, to this moment where his hand is on my wrist and his eyes are boring into mine with an intensity that makes me feel like he can see straight through to my soul, to all my secrets and fears, and the rapidly forming plan to call the FBI the second he walks out my door. "You didn't see my face," he repeats. And this time it's not a question or a request, but a statement of fact. A reality he's imposing on the world through sheer force of will. You had a quiet evening catching up on paperwork. You closed up at your normal time. You went home and had a glass of wine and went to bed, and nothing unusual happened, nothing worth remembering or mentioning or thinking about ever again. I nod. Because what else can I do? Because he's still touching me, and I can feel the leashed violence in him, the capacity for harm that he's keeping carefully controlled, but that could be unleashed in a heartbeat if I give the wrong answer, say the wrong thing, show even a flicker of defiance or resistance. I understand, I manage to whisper, and my voice sounds strange and distant to my own ears, like it's coming from somewhere outside my body, like I'm watching this scene play out from above instead of living it, drowning in it, barely surviving it. He studies me for another long moment, those storm-gray eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. And then he releases my wrist and steps back, creating distance between us that should feel like relief, but somehow just feels like the calm before a worse storm. "Smart girl," he says, and there's something in his voice that might almost be approval, might almost be regret, might almost be a warning. Keep it that way. And then he's gone, disappearing into the night as suddenly as he appeared, leaving me standing in my treatment room with $5,000 in cash, and the coppery smell of blood still lingering in the air, and my entire body shaking so hard I have to grip the counter to stay upright. I stand there for what feels like hours but is probably only minutes, trying to process what just happened, trying to convince myself that it was real and not some kind of stress-induced hallucination. And then I'm moving on autopilot, locking the door, turning off the lights, gathering my things with numb mechanical movements that require no thought, no feeling, no acknowledgement of the earthquake that just shifted the foundation of my safe, predictable, boring life. It's not until I'm in my car, doors locked and engine running, that I pull out my phone and navigate to the FBI's most wanted website, with fingers that leave smudge marks on the screen because my hands are sweating despite the November cold. I scroll through faces, through crimes, through reward amounts that make my temporary filling fee look like pennies, and then I find him. Dante Konstantin Volkov, wanted for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and about a dozen other charges that blur together, because all I can focus on is the photograph. The face that's seared into my memory from 45 minutes of close contact. The storm-gray eyes that looked at me like he was cataloging every detail for later use. The scar on his jaw. The hard set of his mouth, everything matching except for the expression. Because in this photo he looks cold and distant and utterly emotionless, while the man in my chair tonight looked like barely controlled pain wrapped in expensive clothing and dangerous charisma. $5 million reward, the website says, and I'm staring at that number, staring at the phone icon at the bottom of the screen, finger hovering over it, while my mind races through possibilities and consequences, and the very real possibility that calling the FBI might be the smartest or stupidest decision of my life. And I'm still trying to decide, still frozen in this moment of terrible choice, when my phone buzzes in my hand with an incoming text from an unknown number. The message is short, 5 words that make my blood turn to ice and my breath catch in my throat, and any thought of making that call evaporate like morning mist under the glare of terrible truth. Smart girl, keep it that way. The paranoia starts small, insidious, creeping into my life like water seeping through cracks in a foundation until suddenly the whole structure feels unstable and ready to collapse, manifesting first as a prickling sensation at the back of my neck when I'm walking to my car after work, a feeling of being watched that I try to dismiss as residual anxiety from that night. From those storm-gray eyes and that gravel-silk voice and the casual way Dante Konstantin Volkov counted out blood money like he was tipping a waitress instead of buying my silence about a crime I don't even fully understand. I tell myself I'm being ridiculous, that the black SUV I keep seeing parked across from my building is just a coincidence, that the man in the expensive suit drinking coffee at the cafe where I grab my morning latte is just another Brooklyn professional starting his day, that the fact that my patient cancellations have mysteriously tripled in the last 3 days doesn't mean anything sinister, doesn't mean that someone is systematically dismantling my life, doesn't mean that I'm caught in something so much bigger and more dangerous than I could have possibly imagined when I made the catastrophically stupid decision not to call the FBI that night. Sleep becomes a distant memory. Something other people do. Something from my old life before I knew what a Russian mob boss's blood tasted like when it mixed with saliva and dental irrigation solution. And instead I lie awake in my bedroom with a chair wedged under the doorknob, like I'm living in some kind of psychological thriller, listening to every creak and groan of my old brownstone apartment building and wondering if that's just the pipes settling, or if it's footsteps in the hallway, if that's just the wind rattling the windows, or if it's someone testing the locks, if I'm losing my mind, or if the threat is real and immediate and closing in around me like a noose pulled tight by invisible hands. My sister Emily calls me on the third day, her bright college student voice cutting through my fog of exhaustion and fear, to ask if I'm okay because I missed our regular Tuesday night video chat. And I have to bite my tongue against the hysterical urge to tell her everything, to unload this impossible secret onto her 20-year-old shoulders, to beg her to help me figure out what to do. But instead I hear myself lying with smooth, practiced ease, telling her I've just been busy with work, telling her everything is fine, telling her I love her and I'll call her this weekend, all while my eyes track the black SUV that's been parked outside my building for the last 6 hours. Work becomes a special kind of torture because I have to pretend everything is normal, have to smile at patients and discuss treatment plans and make small talk about the weather, while my hands shake so badly that I have to pause between procedures to collect myself, have to excuse myself to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face and stare at my reflection. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, the look of someone who's slowly unraveling, and give myself stern mental pep talks about holding it together, about not falling apart, about surviving this until I can figure out what to do, how to extract myself from this nightmare. Whether calling the FBI now would be salvation or suicide, given that Dante clearly has the resources to monitor my movements and communications. My practice manager, Sandra, asks me twice if I'm feeling all right, her warm brown eyes filled with the kind of maternal concern that makes me want to break down and confess everything. But I just shake my head and blame it on a stomach bug, on stress, on anything but the truth that I'm being stalked by the Russian mafia for reasons I don't fully understand, but that probably end with me disappearing into the East River, wearing concrete shoes or whatever it is that organized crime actually does to people who become liabilities. The breaking point comes on day 4, when I'm locking up the practice at my normal closing time, keys in hand, and pepper spray in my pocket. Like that's going to do anything against trained killers, and I turn around to find him standing there on the sidewalk, like he materialized out of shadows and nightmares. Dante Konstantin Volkov in the flesh, looking nothing like a fugitive, and everything like a successful businessman in his charcoal suit and black overcoat. His storm-gray eyes fixed on me with that same predatory intensity that haunted my dreams for the past 72 hours. My heart stops. Actually stops for one terrible moment before kick-starting again with enough force to make me dizzy, and I'm opening my mouth to scream or run or do something, anything, when he holds up one hand, in a gesture that's somehow both placating and commanding. A silent instruction to stay calm, stay quiet, don't make a scene that will get us both killed. Dr. Reeves, he says, his voice carrying easily across the small distance between us, despite the evening traffic, and the handful of people walking past without even glancing our way, without noticing that they're witnessing a most wanted criminal casually accosting a dentist on a Brooklyn street corner, like this is a normal Tuesday evening social call. I need another appointment. Something painful has developed that requires your immediate professional attention, and I was hoping you might be able to fit me in right now, perhaps under the name Daniel Volker this time. Something a bit more appropriate for your official records should anyone come asking questions about your patient roster. The audacity of it steals my breath. The sheer balls it takes to show up at my practice and request an appointment, like he's a normal patient with a normal dental emergency, instead of a dangerous criminal who's turned my entire life into a waking nightmare. and I'm shaking my head before I even consciously decide to refuse. Backing up until my shoulders hit the locked door of my practice, my keys cutting into my palm with enough pressure to leave marks. "No," I manage to say, and my voice comes out stronger than I feel. Steadier than I have any right to be, given that I'm probably seconds away from being abducted or murdered or worse. "No, you need to leave. You need to stay away from me. I kept your secret like you told me to, but that doesn't mean I'm going to help you again. Doesn't mean I'm going to keep putting myself at risk for someone like you." He moves then, closing the distance between us with those smooth, predatory strides that eat up the sidewalk like he owns it. Like he owns everything and everyone in his path. And suddenly he's close enough that I can smell his cologne again. Something dark and expensive that probably costs more per ounce than my entire medicine cabinet. Close enough that I have to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, because he's got at least 6 inches on my 5'6" frame. Close enough that I can see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, and the tiny scar at the corner of his left eye, and the way his pupils dilate slightly as he looks down at me with an expression that might be concern or calculation, or some dangerous combination of both. "I'm afraid it's not that simple anymore, Dr. Reeves," he says, and there's something in his voice that sends ice water through my veins. Something that tells me my life is about to get so much worse than I ever imagined possible. You see, my enemies, and I have many enemies, an occupational hazard of my particular line of work. They saw me enter your practice that night. They saw me leave 90 minutes later looking significantly less bloody and significantly more composed, and now they've drawn certain conclusions about our relationship. Conclusions that put you in a rather precarious position, regardless of what you actually know or don't know about my business affairs. The world tilts sideways, reality shifting again just when I thought I'd found my footing. And I'm gripping my keys so hard that the metal teeth are definitely breaking skin now, using the pain to anchor myself to the present moment, because the alternative is to spiral into complete panic at the implications of what he's saying. "What kind of conclusions?" I ask, even though I'm not sure I want to hear the answer, even though every instinct I have is screaming at me to stop talking and start running and never look back. "They think you're either my woman or my informant," Dante says with the kind of clinical detachment that suggests he's discussing the weather rather than my imminent danger, his eyes never leaving my face as he watches my reaction with the focused attention of a scientist observing an experiment. "Either way, you represent a potential source of leverage against me. A weakness they can exploit, a vulnerability they can target to gain advantage in a war that's been brewing for the better part of 6 months, and is about to reach a rather violent conclusion, and that makes you, through absolutely no fault of your own, I want to be very clear about that, a liability that needs to be managed, protected, or eliminated, depending on which faction gets to you first." The casual way he includes eliminated in that list of options makes bile rise in my throat, makes my knees go weak enough that I have to lock them to stay upright, makes me realize with horrible clarity that I'm not having a panic attack or a paranoid episode, that the surveillance I've been noticing isn't in my imagination, that I am actually, genuinely, truly in life-threatening danger because I made the mistake of being at my practice when a mob boss needed emergency dental work. "So what are you saying?" I demand, and there's an edge of hysteria creeping into my voice now. The careful control I've been maintaining for 4 days, finally starting to crack under the weight of this impossible situation. That I'm just supposed to accept that my life is over because you decided to involve me in your criminal enterprise? That I'm supposed to be okay with being hunted by your enemies because you couldn't be bothered to go to a hospital like a normal person who's been shot? Something flashes in his eyes. Something that might be anger, or might be respect, or might be some emotion I don't have a name for. And when he speaks again, his voice has dropped to a lower register. Intimate and dangerous and absolutely sincere in a way that makes me believe every word even though I desperately don't want to. "I'm saying that you have 2 options, Dr. Reeves, neither of them particularly appealing, but one of them significantly more likely to keep you alive than the other. And I strongly suggest you choose wisely because I won't make this offer twice. And my enemies won't offer you any choices at all when they decide to make their move." He pauses, letting that sink in, letting me see the cold calculation in his eyes that tells me he's thought through every angle of this situation and arrived at conclusions I'm not going to like. Option 1. You accept my protection. You allow me to assign security personnel to watch over you until this particular conflict is resolved. You make some temporary adjustments to your life and routines for the sake of your continued survival. And when the dust settles, and it will settle one way or another, you walk away from this intact and return to your normal existence with nothing more than an interesting story you can never tell anyone. And option 2, I ask, even though I already know I'm not going to like it, even though the way his jaw tightens tells me it's going to be bad. Worse than bad. Catastrophic. Option 2 is that you refuse my help. You continue living your life as you have been, and within 48 hours you end up as collateral damage in a war you don't understand. Fought by people who view civilian casualties as acceptable losses in the pursuit of power and territory and revenge, he says. And there's no emotion in his voice now, just flat, hard truth delivered with the weight of absolute certainty. Your body will be found in a place meant to send me a message, displayed in a way designed to demonstrate that nothing I value is safe from their reach. And your death will serve no purpose other than to escalate a conflict that's already claimed dozens of lives, and will claim dozens more before it's finished. The image he's painting is so vivid, so horrifying, that for a moment I can't breathe, can't think, can only stand there against my practice door, while my brain tries to process the fact that I'm apparently living in a reality where accepting protection from a mob boss is the better of two terrible options. This is insane, I whisper, and it's not a refusal or an acceptance, just a statement of fact, an acknowledgement that my life has veered so far off course from normal that I can't even see the road anymore. This can't be happening. I'm just a dentist. I don't know anything about your world. I don't want to know anything about your world. I just want to go back to my normal life where the most dangerous thing I deal with is the occasional difficult root canal. I understand that, Dante says, and there's something almost gentle in his voice now, almost sympathetic, almost human beneath all that controlled violence and calculated menace. I understand that you didn't ask for this, didn't want this, that you were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and had the misfortune of being good at your job and professional enough to treat a bleeding stranger instead of calling the police. And if I could undo that night, if I could erase your involvement and return you to your safe, predictable existence, I would, but we don't get to rewrite the past, Dr. Reeves. We only get to manage the present and try to survive long enough to see the future. He reaches into his jacket, and I flinch, can't help it, still half expecting him to pull out a gun, even though the rational part of my brain knows he's not going to shoot me on a public street. But what he withdraws is just a business card. Plain white stock with a phone number printed in simple black font. Nothing else. No name or company or any identifying information. This is my direct line, he says, holding it out to me between two fingers like he's offering a lifeline or a death sentence. I can't tell which. You have until midnight tonight to make your decision, to call this number and accept my protection, or to take your chances with fate and hope that my enemies are slower or less motivated than I think they are. And whatever you decide, I want you to know that I take no pleasure in forcing this choice upon you, in disrupting your life, in making you a piece on a chessboard you never asked to be placed on. I take the card, because what else am I supposed to do? My fingers brushing against his for just a moment, and even that brief contact sends electricity racing up my arm, some twisted combination of fear and adrenaline, and something I absolutely refuse to acknowledge as attraction, because that would be insane, would be Stockholm Syndrome or survival instinct, or temporary insanity, brought on by extreme stress. And if I refuse? I ask, even though he's already told me, even though I already know, even though I'm just stalling now, trying to find some third option that doesn't exist in this terrible binary choice he's presented me with. His expression doesn't change, but something shifts in his eyes, something that looks almost like regret, almost like sorrow, almost like he genuinely wishes things were different, even though he's the one who made them this way. Then I'll have Victor collect your body when they're done with you and make sure you get a proper burial, and I'll send flowers to your sister Emily at Boston University, and a donation to your favorite charity in your name, and I'll carry the weight of your death along with all the others that haunt my sleep. And life will go on because that's what life does, Dr. Reeves. It goes on with or without us, indifferent to our choices and our regrets and our desperate wishes that things could be different. The mention of Emily, her name, her school, details he shouldn't know, and couldn't know unless he's been investigating me, researching me, learning everything about me and everyone I love. That's what breaks through my paralysis, what transforms my fear into something sharper and more focused, something that tastes like rage and feels like violation. You looked into my family, I say, and it's not a question because I already know the answer. Can see it in the unapologetic set of his jaw, in the way he doesn't even bother to deny it. You researched my sister. You know where she goes to school. You probably know her class schedule and her roommate's name and what she had for breakfast this morning, and now you're using that information to threaten me, to force my compliance, to make sure I don't have any choice but to do exactly what you want. I'm not threatening your sister, Dante says, and his voice has gone cold now, hard as winter steel. All traces of sympathy or regret vanished like they were never there at all. I'm making you understand the reality of your situation. The fact that you are not the only person at risk here. The fact that people like Dmitry Kozlov, the man who currently wants me dead and will happily go through you to get to me, they don't have any compunctions about hurting innocent college students if it serves their purposes, if it sends the right message, if it brings them one step closer to victory in a game where the only rule is survival, and everything else is just details to be managed or casualties to be mourned. He leans in closer, close enough that I can feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough that I can see the fine lines around his eyes that suggest he's older than I initially thought, maybe late 30s instead of early, close enough that when he speaks his breath ghosts across my cheek and makes me shiver despite the November cold. I know everything about you, Dr. Sarah Reeves, he says, and my full name in his mouth sounds like a possession, like a claim, like a brand being burned into my skin. I know that Emily is a sophomore studying environmental science, that she gets her coffee from the Starbucks on Commonwealth Avenue every morning at 7:15, that she walks through the Boston Commons on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons between classes, that she calls you every Sunday night, and that you're the only family she has left after your parents died in that car accident when she was 14 and you were 23, and you became her legal guardian and put your own dreams on hold to raise her and put her through school. I know that you volunteer at the free clinic in Bed-Stuy twice a month, that you donate to 3 different charities on a regular basis, that you've never even had a parking ticket, much less any kind of criminal record, that you're a good person, Dr. Reeves, genuinely good in a way that's rare in this world. And that's exactly why I'm offering you protection instead of simply eliminating the problem you represent. Because contrary to what you might believe about me and my profession, I am not in the business of murdering innocent women who had the misfortune of being good Samaritans when I needed help. The speech leaves me breathless, reeling, trying to process the cognitive dissonance of a mass murderer, waxing poetic about my character, while simultaneously making it crystal clear that he could destroy everything I love with a single phone call. And I'm opening my mouth to respond, to accept or refuse or maybe just scream, when a black SUV pulls up to the curb behind him and the back door opens and a man built like a mountain unfolds himself from the interior. All shoulders and scars and cold Slavic features that suggest violence is his native language, and mercy is a foreign concept he's never bothered to learn. "Boss," the man says in accented English, his eyes scanning the street with professional paranoia, cataloging threats and escape routes with the same automatic efficiency I use to assess oral health. "We need to move. Kozlov's people were spotted 3 blocks north and they're heading this way, probably planning to make contact with the doctor here and send you a message about boundaries and territory, and all the usual posturing bullshit that happens before someone gets killed." Dante doesn't even glance at the man, his attention still locked on me with that unsettling intensity. But I can see the shift in his posture, the subtle tensing that suggests he's preparing for violence, calculating odds, ready to transform from businessman to killer in the space between heartbeats. Victor will be staying with you, he says. And it's not a request or a suggestion. It's a simple statement of fact. A decision that's already been made regardless of my input or consent. He's the best I have, trained by Spetsnaz before he came to work for me, and he will keep you alive until you make your decision, or until circumstances force my hand, whichever comes first. And I strongly suggest you not try to run from him, or lose him, or call the police, because all of those options end poorly for everyone involved, and I'd rather not have to clean up that particular mess. Wait, I start to say, but Dante is already moving, already sliding into the SUV with fluid grace, already disappearing behind tinted windows that reflect my own terrified face back at me. And then the vehicle is pulling away into traffic, and I'm left standing on the sidewalk with a business card clutched in my trembling hand, and a human weapon named Victor watching me with eyes like a shark's, cold and empty, and absolutely committed to his assigned task of keeping me breathing, whether I want his protection or not. That night, when someone breaks into my apartment while I'm lying awake in bed, with every light in the place burning, and that chair still wedged under my bedroom door, when I hear the sound of my living room window sliding open, and footsteps crossing my floor, and voices speaking in Russian about finding the dentist bitch and teaching her what happens to Volkov's whores, Victor is there, materializing in my hallway like a particularly violent guardian angel, and the sounds that follow, breaking furniture, grunts of pain, the wet thud of flesh hitting flesh, the final terrible crack of something breaking that might be bone or might be a neck. Those sounds will haunt my nightmares for years to come. When silence finally falls, and I work up the courage to open my bedroom door, Victor is standing in my kitchen with blood on his knuckles and a body at his feet. A young man with a knife still clutched in his dead hand and surprised eyes staring at nothing. And Victor looks at me with those shark eyes and says in his thick accent, "You call boss now, yes? You tell him you accept protection, because next time they send more than one, and I am good but I am not miracle worker, and you will be much safer in penthouse than in this shithole apartment with locks a child could pick." I look at the dead man in my kitchen, at the blood seeping into the grout between my tiles, at Victor's completely calm demeanor like he kills people in other people's kitchens every Tuesday evening, and I realize with horrible, crystalline clarity that there is no going back, no return to normal, no third option that leads anywhere except a grave, and my hand is already reaching for my phone, already pulling up that business card, already dialing the number that will change everything. And when Dante answers on the first ring with just his name, Volkov, delivered like a challenge and a question and a demand all wrapped into one word, I hear myself say in a voice that doesn't sound like mine anymore, doesn't sound like the careful, cautious dentist I was 4 days ago. "There's a dead man in my kitchen, and your protection detail says I need to move to your penthouse. So I guess I'm accepting option 1. But we need to establish some ground rules about this arrangement, because I am not going to be your prisoner or your property or whatever it is you think this makes me. Do you understand?" There's a pause. A moment of silence, where I can hear him breathing on the other end of the line, can almost see the smile I know must be curving his dangerous mouth. And when he finally speaks, his voice is warm with something that might be approval, or might be dark amusement, or might be the beginning of something far more complicated than a simple protection arrangement. "Oh, Dr. Reeves," he says, and my name in his mouth still sounds like possession, still sounds like promise, still sounds like the beginning of a story that I already know won't have a simple ending. "I don't think you understand yet what this makes you, but you will, and when you do, I think you're going to surprise both of us with what you're capable of becoming. But yes, we can discuss ground rules, we can negotiate boundaries, we can pretend that you have choices in this matter if it makes you feel better. So come to the address Victor will give you, bring whatever you need for a few days, and we'll see about keeping you alive long enough to figure out exactly what role you're going to play in the story that's about to unfold. Yes?" The penthouse is not what I expected, though to be fair, I'm not entirely sure what I was expecting when Victor drove me through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan at 2 a.m, with a dead body wrapped in plastic sheeting in my bathtub, and instructions to pack only essentials because everything else could be replaced or retrieved later. My mind still spinning with the surreal horror of watching a man die in my kitchen, and the even more surreal reality that I was now apparently moving in with one of the FBI's most wanted criminals as some kind of protected witness, except I'm not witnessing anything except my own life spiraling completely out of control. I thought there would be more obvious signs of criminality, more evidence of the violence and corruption that defines Dante Konstantin Volkov's empire, more guns and guards, and the kind of ostentatious wealth that screams illegal enterprise. But instead, what I find when Victor keys us into the top floor of a sleek glass tower in Tribeca is something that looks more like it belongs in an architecture magazine than a crime boss's lair. All clean lines and expensive minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the city like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Furniture that probably costs more than my entire year's salary, arranged with the kind of careful aesthetic consideration that speaks of either professional interior designers or a man with surprisingly refined taste. Dante is waiting in the living room when we arrive, standing by those impossible windows with a glass of what looks like whiskey in his hand, backlit by the city lights in a way that makes him look more like a shadow than a man. And he turns when he hears us enter with that same predatory grace I'm starting to recognize as fundamental to his nature, the way he moves through space like he owns it, like gravity itself bends to accommodate his presence. He's shed the suit jacket and tie from earlier, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and marked with more of those tattoos I glimpsed on his neck. Orthodox crosses and Cyrillic script, and images I can't quite make out from this distance. But that probably tell the story of his life in ink and violence. And when his storm-gray eyes find mine across the expanse of marble floor and Danish modern furniture, I feel that same electric shock of awareness that hit me on the sidewalk outside my practice. That dangerous recognition that this man is not just a threat to my safety, but potentially something far more complicated and far more dangerous to the carefully constructed walls I've built around my heart. "Dr. Reeves," he says, and I'm starting to hate the way my name sounds in his mouth. The way he makes those two simple words carry weight and meaning and implications I'm not ready to examine. The way hearing it makes my pulse spike and my breath catch, and my body respond in ways that are absolutely inappropriate, given that this man is a criminal who has essentially kidnapped me for my own protection, which is possibly the most twisted justification for house arrest I've ever encountered. I trust Victor explained the situation adequately during your drive, made it clear that this is a temporary arrangement designed solely for your safety, that you are a guest here rather than a prisoner, and that while I must insist on certain security protocols for obvious reasons, I have no intention of restricting your movements or your freedoms any more than is absolutely necessary to keep you alive until this particular storm passes. I'm still standing in the foyer, with my hastily packed overnight bag clutched in white-knuckled hands, and the smell of my kitchen intruder's blood still somehow lingering in my nostrils even though I showered and changed clothes before leaving my apartment. And the surreal absurdity of this entire situation finally breaks through whatever shock has been insulating me from reality for the past few hours, sending a laugh bubbling up from my chest that comes out sounding slightly hysterical, slightly unhinged, slightly like I'm one more impossible revelation away from a complete mental breakdown. A guest, I repeat, and the word tastes like a lie on my tongue, bitter and wrong and completely disconnected from the reality that I'm standing in a mob boss's penthouse at 2 a.m. because someone tried to murder me in my own home. Is that what we're calling this arrangement? Some kind of twisted hospitality? Where the host assigns armed guards, and the guest isn't allowed to leave without risking death? Because I have to tell you, Mr. Volkov, I've stayed in some questionable hotels in my time, but this really takes the concept of captive audience to a whole new level. Something flickers in his eyes. Something that might be amusement or might be respect for the fact that I'm still capable of sarcasm, despite the trauma of the evening. And he sets his whiskey glass down on a side table with deliberate care, before crossing the room toward me with those measured, controlled strides that make me hyper-aware of every inch of space he eliminates between us. "You're angry," he observes, and it's not a question, just a statement of obvious fact delivered in that gravel silk voice that seems designed specifically to make my nervous system light up like a Christmas tree. You're terrified and traumatized and furious that your life has been upended by forces beyond your control, that you've been dragged into a world you never wanted any part of, that a man died in your kitchen tonight and you had to watch Victor dispose of the body like it was just another Tuesday evening inconvenience, and you want someone to blame for all of it, someone to rage at, someone to hold accountable for the fact that nothing will ever be the same again. He's close enough now that I have to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that I can smell that dark, expensive cologne mixed with whiskey and something else, something that might be gunpowder, or might just be my imagination running wild. And the accuracy of his assessment steals the breath from my lungs because, yes, that's exactly what I'm feeling. That precise cocktail of emotions he just catalogued with the clinical precision of a diagnostician. And I hate that he can read me so easily. Hate that he understands me when I barely understand myself right now. Yes, I say, and my voice comes out rougher than I intended. Raw with emotion I can't quite contain anymore. Yes, I'm angry, I'm furious, I'm absolutely enraged that you've somehow managed to destroy my entire carefully constructed life in less than a week, just by existing. Just by walking into my practice with a bullet-grazed tooth and bleeding all over my professional ethics, and my peace of mind, and my naive belief that if I just kept my head down and did my job and stayed in my lane, I could live a quiet, safe, normal life, where the most dangerous thing I encountered was the occasional difficult extraction. I'm breathing hard now, my chest heaving with the force of words I've been holding back since that first night, since the moment his hand closed around my wrist and I realized I was caught in something so much bigger than myself. And Dante is just watching me with those unfathomable storm-gray eyes, letting me vent my rage and fear and frustration without interrupting, without defending himself, without doing anything except bearing witness to my breakdown with the kind of patient attention that somehow makes it worse because I want him to argue back, want him to give me an excuse to hate him completely, instead of this complicated tangle of fear and anger and unwilling fascination that's currently tying my emotions into knots I don't know how to untangle. And the worst part, I continue, my voice rising despite my best efforts to maintain control, despite Victor's presence somewhere behind me probably listening to every word. The absolute worst part is that I can't even properly hate you for it, because you're right, you're absolutely right, that refusing your protection would be suicide, that going back to my normal life would be signing my own death warrant, that accepting this insane arrangement is the only rational choice available to me, which means I can't even have the satisfaction of defying you out of principle because my principle of staying alive apparently trumps my principle of not accepting help from violent criminals who ruin people's lives as a side effect of their business dealings. The silence that follows my outburst is deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the city far below. And I'm expecting Dante to respond with anger or dismissal, or that cold calculation I've seen in his eyes when he's explaining the brutal realities of his world. But instead what I get is something I never anticipated, never could have predicted in 1,000 years of knowing men like him exist. He reaches out with one hand and cups my face with a gentleness that seems utterly at odds with everything I know about him, his palm warm against my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I didn't even realize had escaped. And when he speaks, his voice is soft, almost tender, carrying none of the hard edges I've come to associate with Dante Konstantin Volkov. "You're right to be angry," he says, and there's something in his expression that might be regret, might be sorrow, might be the weight of 1,000 choices that led to this moment where an innocent woman is crying in his penthouse because his world collided with hers in the worst possible way. "You're right that this is unfair, that you deserve better, that you should never have been pulled into this nightmare, and if I could change it, if I could go back to that night and choose a different dentist or a different solution, or just let myself bleed out in an alley somewhere so that you could continue living your quiet, safe, normal life, I would. But we don't get to rewrite history, Dr. Reeves. We only get to survive the present and try to build some kind of future from the wreckage of our choices. The unexpected kindness in his touch, in his words, in the way he's looking at me like I'm something precious rather than a problem to be managed. It breaks something inside me that I've been desperately trying to hold together. And suddenly I'm crying in earnest. Great, heaving sobs that shake my entire body and make it impossible to breathe or think or do anything except stand there and fall apart while a mob boss holds my face in his hands and lets me destroy myself on the rocks of my own fear and anger and exhaustion. He doesn't try to stop me or comfort me with empty platitudes, doesn't tell me everything will be okay or that I'm safe now, or any of the meaningless reassurances people offer when they don't know what else to say. He just holds me steady while I break. His presence solid and grounding in a way that shouldn't make sense. Shouldn't feel like safety when he's the source of my danger. Shouldn't make me want to lean into his touch instead of pulling away. When I finally manage to get myself under some semblance of control, when the sobs have subsided into hiccuping breaths and trembling shoulders, I become aware that Victor has discreetly disappeared, that we're alone in this vast, expensive space with the city lights painting patterns across the floor, and that Dante is still touching me, his hand still cradling my face like I'm made of something fragile and valuable instead of just an ordinary woman who's had the worst week of her life. "I'm sorry," I manage to whisper, though I'm not entirely sure what I'm apologizing for. The breakdown, the accusations, the fact that I'm standing in his home wearing yesterday's clothes and probably looking like something that crawled out of a disaster zone. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to be this person who's involved in mob wars and protected witnesses and dead bodies in kitchens. I'm just a dentist. I'm just supposed to fix teeth and file insurance claims and have boring conversations about flossing techniques, not whatever this is." "I know," Dante says, and his other hand comes up to frame my face, holding me in place with a gentleness that should terrify me more than his violence but somehow doesn't. And I realize with dawning horror that I'm not pulling away, not resisting, not doing any of the sensible things a rational person would do when being touched by a dangerous criminal. "I know this isn't the life you chose. Know that you're brave and strong and doing remarkably well considering the circumstances. And I want you to know that while you're under my protection, while you're living in this penthouse and under my care, no one will hurt you. No one will touch you. No one will so much as speak to you in a tone you find disrespectful. Because you are under my protection now, Dr. Reeves, and that means something in my world. That means you are sacrosanct, that harming you becomes equivalent to declaring war on me personally, and there are very few people stupid enough or suicidal enough to make that particular choice." The possessiveness in his voice when he says, "my protection," should set off every alarm bell in my head, should make me recognize the danger of being claimed by a man like him, should remind me that protection and possession are often just two sides of the same controlling coin. But instead, all I can focus on is the warmth of his hands on my face, the intensity of his gaze, the way my body is responding to his proximity with a heat that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the kind of attraction I absolutely cannot afford to feel for someone like him. "Why?" I ask, and my voice comes out barely above a whisper, rough and uncertain and carrying a question I'm not sure I want answered. "Why does it matter to you whether I live or die? Why go to all this effort to protect someone who's nothing to you? Just a random dentist who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? Why not just eliminate the problem I represent and move on with your war?" Something dark and dangerous flashes in his eyes, something that makes my pulse spike with a combination of fear and anticipation, and he leans closer, close enough that I can feel his breath on my lips, close enough that if I shifted forward even slightly we would be kissing, close enough that the tension between us feels like a living thing, electric and hungry and demanding acknowledgement. Because I am many things, Dr. Reeves, many terrible and violent and unforgivable things, but I am not the kind of monster who murders innocent women to solve problems, not the kind of man who punishes people for the crime of showing compassion when I needed help. And because something about you, your courage, your defiance, The way you looked at me in that dental chair with fear and professionalism warring in your eyes. Something about you has gotten under my skin in a way I don't fully understand and probably shouldn't examine too closely. But here we are, and I find that I want you alive, want you safe, want you here where I can protect you from the consequences of my world colliding with yours. The confession hangs in the air between us, raw and honest in a way that feels dangerous, that feels like he's giving me ammunition I could use against him, and I should be processing the implications of what he just said, should be analyzing the power dynamics and the psychological complexity of captor and captive developing feelings for each other. But instead, all I can think about is how easy it would be to close the distance between us. How badly some traitorous part of me wants to know what it would feel like to kiss a man like him, to taste danger and darkness and the kind of passion that probably burns everything it touches. "This is insane," I whisper, but I don't pull away. Don't break eye contact. Don't do anything except stand there trembling in his hands while my rational mind wars with something far more primal and far more dangerous. This entire situation is insane. You're a criminal. I'm a dentist. There's a dead man's blood still on Victor's knuckles somewhere in this penthouse. And we're standing here having a moment like we're in some kind of twisted romance novel instead of a hostage situation disguised as protective custody. Yes, Dante agrees. And there's dark amusement in his voice now, mixed with something that sounds like genuine affection. Like he appreciates my ability to maintain perspective even in the middle of whatever this is. Yes, it's insane. It's dangerous. It's probably the worst idea either of us has ever had. And yet here we are. And I think we both know that this, whatever this is developing between us, it's not going away just because we acknowledge how inappropriate and impossible it is. So we have a choice, Dr. Reeves. We can pretend it doesn't exist and maintain professional distance and spend however long this protection arrangement lasts dancing around the elephant in the room. Or we can be honest about the attraction, acknowledge it like adults, and then decide together what we want to do about it. The fact that he's giving me a choice, that he's not simply taking what he wants the way I imagine men in his position usually do, that he's treating me like an equal participant in whatever this dangerous dance is becoming. It does something to my resolve, chips away at the walls I'm trying to maintain between us, makes me see him not just as a threat or a captor, but as a man, complicated and dangerous, and surprisingly honorable in his own twisted way. I don't know what I want, I admit, and it's the most honest thing I've said since arriving at this penthouse, the most vulnerable I've allowed myself to be in his presence. I don't know how to want someone like you. Don't know if this feeling is real or just adrenaline and trauma and some kind of psychological survival mechanism my brain has activated to help me cope with an impossible situation. Don't know if I can trust any of my instincts right now when everything is so turned upside down and inside out. He studies me for a long moment, those storm-gray eyes searching my face like he's looking for something specific, some answer to a question he hasn't asked yet, and then slowly, deliberately, giving me every opportunity to pull away or refuse. He leans in and presses his lips to my forehead in a gesture that's somehow more intimate than a kiss would have been, more tender than anything I expected from a man with his reputation. "Then we table this discussion," he says against my skin, and I can feel the words as much as hear them, can feel the warmth of his breath and the barely restrained control in his body. We acknowledge that something exists here, something complicated and dangerous and potentially catastrophic for both of us, and we give it time. Give you space to process everything that's happened. Give us both room to figure out what's real and what's just circumstance and chemistry colliding in a pressure cooker situation, and in the meantime, I'll show you to your room, show you around this space that's going to be your home for the foreseeable future, and we'll try to maintain some boundaries and some sanity while the world outside tries to kill us both. He pulls back, creating distance that feels like loss, and I'm simultaneously relieved and disappointed, grateful for the reprieve and annoyed that he stopped. And the contradictory nature of my own feelings just reinforces how absolutely off balance this entire situation has made me. how completely unprepared I am for the psychological and emotional complexity of being protected by someone I should hate but find myself increasingly drawn to despite every logical reason I can think of to resist. Victor reappears from wherever he vanished to, materializing from a hallway like he was just waiting for his cue. And Dante says something to him in rapid Russian that I can't understand, but that makes Victor nod and gesture for me to follow him. And I find myself being led through the penthouse toward what I assume is the guest room. My overnight bag still clutched in my hands, and my mind still reeling from everything that just happened. The room Victor shows me to is beautiful in that same minimalist, expensive way as the rest of the penthouse. All neutral colors and high-end furniture and an ensuite bathroom that's probably bigger than my entire bedroom back at my apartment. And there's a silk robe laid out on the bed, and toiletries already stocked in the bathroom like Dante was expecting me. Like he prepared for my arrival before I even agreed to come here. And I don't know whether to be touched by his thoughtfulness or disturbed by his presumption. Victor explains the security protocols in his thick accent. Don't go near the windows without checking with him first. Don't leave the penthouse without an escort. Don't open the door for anyone under any circumstances. The kind of rules that reinforce just how much danger I'm actually in. And then he leaves me alone with my thoughts and my fears and the lingering warmth of Dante's hands on my face. I don't sleep that night. Can't sleep despite the luxurious bed and the exhaustion weighing down my bones, instead lying awake watching the city lights paint patterns on the ceiling and trying to understand how my life went from boring and predictable to absolutely insane in less than a week. Trying to process the fact that I'm developing feelings for a man who represents everything I should fear. Trying to figure out who I'm becoming in this situation, and whether I'll recognize myself when it's finally over. Somewhere around 4 a.m, I hear it. The sound of a piano being played with surprising skill and heartbreaking melancholy, and I follow the sound through the dark penthouse to find Dante sitting at a grand piano I hadn't even noticed earlier. His fingers moving over the keys with the same controlled precision he brings to everything else, playing something Russian and mournful that sounds like it's being pulled from somewhere deep in his soul. I watch him from the doorway, this dangerous man playing beautiful music in the darkness, and I realize with dawning certainty that everything I thought I knew about good and evil, about right and wrong, about the clear lines that separate the civilized from the criminal, it's all far more complicated than I ever imagined, far more nuanced than the comfortable categories I've been living in, and that Dante Konstantin Volkov is not the monster I want him to be, not the simple villain I could easily hate, but something far more complex and far more dangerous. A man with a code, a man with depth, a man with the capacity for tenderness and violence in equal measure. And I'm absolutely terrified of what it means that I'm starting to see him as human instead of threat. He looks up and sees me standing there, his hands stilling on the keys. And for a moment we just look at each other across the darkened room. No words necessary, no explanations required. Just two people caught in an impossible situation trying to find some way to survive it together. And when he gestures to the bench beside him in silent invitation, I find myself crossing the room and sitting down next to him, close enough that our shoulders almost touch, close enough that I can feel the heat of his body, close enough that when he starts playing again, something softer this time, something that sounds like hope struggling against darkness, I can pretend for just a moment that we're just two normal people sharing a quiet moment instead of a dentist and a mob boss dancing on the edge of something that could destroy us both. Rachmaninoff, he says quietly, his fingers never stopping their movement across the keys, and I realize he's telling me what he's playing, sharing something personal, letting me into his world in small, careful increments. My mother used to play this piece when I was young, before everything changed, before my father was killed, and I had to become something other than the boy who loved music and literature and quiet evenings at home. And sometimes when I can't sleep, when the weight of everything I've done and everyone I've killed becomes too heavy to carry alone, I come here and I play and I remember who I used to be before the violence shaped me into this. The vulnerability in his admissions steals my breath, makes my eyes sting with tears I refuse to shed. And without thinking, without analyzing or second-guessing or considering the implications. I let my head rest against his shoulder. A small gesture of comfort and connection and acknowledgement that we're both carrying weights too heavy for one person to bear alone. And when his playing doesn't falter, when he doesn't pull away or stiffen or reject my tentative offer of companionship, I close my eyes and let the music wash over me, and accept that whatever is developing between us, it's already past the point of denial or resistance, already blooming into something complicated and dangerous and inevitable. And all I can do is hold on and hope we both survive what comes next. The days that follow that first night blur together in a strange, dreamlike suspension of normal reality, where mornings find me waking in silk sheets that cost more than my monthly rent, while Dante brings me coffee prepared exactly the way I like it. Cream, no sugar, French press instead of drip. A detail he shouldn't know but somehow does, probably extracted from the same thorough background investigation that revealed everything else about my life. And I find myself settling into a domestic routine with a man who leaves for hours at a time and returns with blood on his cuffs that he casually washes off in the kitchen sink, like it's paint or dirt instead of evidence of violence. Like taking lives is just another item on his daily to-do list, between business meetings and evening plans. We orbit each other carefully in the shared space of the penthouse, maintaining those boundaries we agreed on that first night, even as the tension between us builds with each passing day. Each shared meal where our knees brush under the table and send electricity racing through my nervous system. Each evening, where I find him at the piano and sit beside him without asking permission because somewhere along the way it became our ritual, our safe space. The one place where we can exist together without the weight of everything else pressing down on us. Victor becomes a strange kind of companion, always present but never intrusive, treating me with a gruff respect that suggests Dante has given explicit instructions about my treatment. And sometimes I catch him watching me with an expression that might be curiosity, or might be concern, like he's trying to figure out what I am to his boss. What this arrangement actually means beyond the surface explanation of protective custody. I learn that Dante reads voraciously, that his bookshelves are filled with Russian literature in the original language and philosophy texts, and history books that show evidence of being actually read rather than just displayed for show, that he has opinions about Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and the nature of morality that are surprisingly nuanced for a man who kills people for a living. And during our dinners together, because somehow we've fallen into the habit of eating together, sharing meals that Dante prepares himself with surprising skill, because he doesn't trust anyone else in his kitchen. After that incident, he mentions only once, something about a poisoning attempt 3 years ago. We have conversations that range from the mundane to the philosophical, discussions that make me forget sometimes who and what he is, that make me see him as just a man, brilliant and damaged, and trying to survive in a world that shaped him into something both terrible and oddly principled. The night everything shifts starts like any other evening in our strange coexistence, with me reading in the living room while Dante works in his study on business I don't ask about and don't want to know about, maintaining the comfortable fiction that if I don't see the details of his criminal enterprise, then I can pretend they don't exist, can compartmentalize the man who cooks me dinner and plays Rachmaninoff in the darkness from the man who orders deaths and manages territory like chess pieces on a board. Victor appears in the doorway with an expression I've never seen before, something that looks like genuine alarm beneath his usually stoic exterior, and he says something in rapid Russian that makes Dante's face go absolutely cold, that makes him stand up from his desk with the kind of controlled violence I've only seen hints of before. And then he's moving toward me with purpose and intent, and something in his eyes that makes my stomach drop because I just know that whatever Victor just told him, it's bad. Worse than bad. Catastrophic. Kozlov has Emily, Dante says, and the words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and the strength from my legs, and suddenly I'm on my feet, but I don't remember standing. My hands are shaking, but I can't feel them. My mouth is open, but no sound is coming out, because my worst nightmare, the fear, that's been lurking in the back of my mind since the moment Dante mentioned my sister's name. It's coming true. It's happening, and I can't breathe, can't think, can't do anything except stare at him with horror, while he explains in that clinical, detached voice he uses when delivering bad news that Kozlov's men grabbed Emily from her dorm room 2 hours ago, that they're demanding a trade. Me for her, plus Dante's complete withdrawal from the Brooklyn territories, plus a public acknowledgement that Kozlov won and Dante lost this particular war. He wants to humiliate me, Dante continues, and there's something beneath the ice in his voice now, something that sounds like rage barely contained beneath layers of control. He wants to force me to choose between my empire and your life, wants to prove that I'm weak, that I've become soft, that caring about someone is a vulnerability he can exploit, and he's using your sister as the leverage to make it happen. The room spins around me, reality tilting sideways as I process the implications of what he's saying, as I understand with horrible clarity that my sister, innocent, brilliant Emily, who wanted to save the environment and had never hurt anyone in her entire 20 years, is being held hostage because of me, because I got pulled into Dante's world, because his enemies think I matter to him enough that threatening me through her will give them what they want. I'm going, I say, and my voice sounds strange to my own ears, distant and cold and absolutely certain, because there is no choice here, no decision to be made, no universe in which I let my baby sister die for my mistakes. Whatever he wants, whatever the trade terms are, I'm going, I'm doing it, and you're going to let me because if you don't, if you try to stop me or protect me or choose me over her, I will never forgive you. I will hate you until the day I die, and that will destroy whatever this thing is between us far more effectively than any bullet or betrayal ever could. Dante's face goes through a series of expressions too quick to catalog, rage and frustration, and something that looks almost like pain. And then he's crossing the distance between us and gripping my shoulders with enough force that it should hurt, but somehow doesn't, his eyes boring into mine with desperate intensity. You think I don't know that? He demands, and his control is fracturing now, the careful composure he maintains cracking to reveal the man beneath, raw and furious, and terrified in ways I didn't think he was capable of being. You think I haven't been planning an extraction since the moment Victor told me, that I haven't already called in every resource I have, that I'm not going to do everything in my power to get your sister back safely. But you cannot. You absolutely cannot. Offer yourself up as sacrifice because Kozlov doesn't want to trade. He wants to kill you in front of me, wants to use your death as the ultimate demonstration of his power, and I cannot. I will not allow that to happen. The protectiveness in his voice, the genuine fear beneath his anger, it breaks something loose inside me, something that's been building since that first night at the piano, since every shared meal, and every careful conversation, and every moment where we pretended we weren't falling into something neither of us intended, but both of us want, despite the impossibility of it all. Then we go together, I say, and I reach up to frame his face the way he framed mine that first night, turning the gesture back on him, claiming my right to touch him, to comfort him, to be an equal partner in this nightmare instead of just a victim to be protected. We go together. We bring Victor and whoever else you trust. We make the trade, but we don't play by Kozlov's rules. We create our own rules, and we get Emily out alive no matter what it costs, no matter what we have to sacrifice, because I am not just your weakness anymore, Dante. I am not just some helpless civilian you have to protect from the consequences of your world. I am choosing to be part of this, choosing to stand beside you instead of behind you, choosing to trust that together we're stronger than apart. The shock in his eyes at my use of his first name, the way his breath catches when I call him by it instead of the formal Mr. Volkov I've been using to maintain distance, it tells me he understands what I'm offering, what I'm accepting, what this moment means for both of us. Sarah, he says, and my name in his mouth has never sounded like this before, has never carried this weight of emotion and desire and desperate need. And then he's kissing me. Finally, inevitably, crushing his mouth to mine with the kind of hunger that suggests he's been holding back far longer than the week I've been living here. holding back maybe since that first night in my dental chair when our eyes met and something sparked between us that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. The kiss is everything I didn't know I needed and everything I absolutely shouldn't want. Consuming and desperate and tasting like whiskey and danger and the kind of passion that burns away everything else, that makes me forget about the danger and the impossibility and the fact that we're about to walk into what might be a suicide mission to save my sister. And all I can focus on is the way his hands are in my hair, the way my body is pressed against his, the way this feels both terrifyingly new and inevitably right. Like we've been building toward this moment since the second he walked into my practice bleeding and desperate. When we finally break apart, both breathing hard, both trembling with want and fear and adrenaline. He rests his forehead against mine and says in a voice rough with emotion, "I am going to get your sister back. I am going to keep you both alive. And when this is over, when Kozlov is dead and the threat is neutralized and you're finally safe, we are going to have a very long conversation about what happens next, about whether what we feel is real or just circumstance, about whether a dentist and a monster can build something that lasts beyond crisis and adrenaline. But right now, right at this moment, I need you to promise me that you will do exactly what I tell you when we walk into that warehouse, that you will trust me completely, even when it looks like everything is going wrong, that you will remember that I have been playing this game for 20 years, and I know how men like Kozlov think, how they operate, and how to turn their arrogance against them." His hands cup my face, thumbs brushing across my cheekbones with heartbreaking gentleness, and I can see in his eyes that he's terrified, genuinely afraid in ways that probably make him feel weak, probably go against everything he's built himself into. And the fact that he's letting me see it, letting me witness his vulnerability, it means more than any declaration of feeling ever could. "I promise," I whisper, and I mean it with every fiber of my being, because I trust him in ways that defy logic and reason. Trust him to keep Emily safe. Trust him to navigate the violence and politics of his world in ways I never could. Trust him with my life and my sister's life and my heart that's already lost to him, even though I've been fighting against admitting it to myself. I promise I'll follow your lead. I'll trust you completely. But you have to promise me something too. Promise me that if it comes down to choosing between me and Emily, if Kozlov forces that choice, you save her. You let me go and you save my sister because she's innocent in all of this. She has her whole life ahead of her. And I cannot live with myself if she dies because of decisions I made. Because I failed to protect her the way I've been protecting her since our parents died. The anguish that crosses his face tells me he doesn't want to make that promise, doesn't want to even consider a scenario where he has to choose. But after a long moment where he searches my eyes for some other option, some escape clause, he finally nods once, sharp and definite, and I know that whatever happens in that warehouse, whatever Kozlov has planned, Dante will honor his word, because that's who he is beneath all the violence and the reputation. A man who keeps his promises even when they destroy him, especially when they destroy him, because that's the twisted code of honor that defines men like him. Victor appears in the doorway again, this time with weapons and tactical gear, and an expression that suggests the time for talking is over. The time for action has arrived. And as I watch Dante transform before my eyes, from the man who kissed me with desperate passion into the cold, controlled mob boss who has survived 2 decades in the most dangerous business in the world, I realize that I'm about to see the full extent of what he's capable of, about to witness the violence I've been sheltered from during my time in this penthouse. And I have no idea if I'll be able to look at him the same way afterward, if I'll be able to reconcile the man I'm falling for with the monster he becomes when protecting what's his. But I also know with absolute certainty that I'm not walking away, not abandoning him or Emily or this impossible situation, that I'm choosing to stand in the fire with him and hope we both make it out alive. The warehouse smells like rust and old machinery, and the particular kind of decay that comes from buildings left to rot in forgotten corners of Brooklyn. And as Victor leads me through the darkness with Dante, a silent, lethal presence at my back, I try to control the shaking in my hands, try to breathe through the terror that's threatening to close my throat completely. Try to remember that we have a plan, even if that plan involves me walking into the crosshairs of a man who wants to use my death as a message written in blood and pain. Emily is there when we enter the main floor of the warehouse, tied to a chair in the center of a pool of harsh light cast by industrial work lamps, her face pale and tear-streaked and swollen from crying, and the sight of her, my baby sister who I raised, who I protected, who I promised our dying mother I would keep safe. It ignites something primal in my chest, something that burns away the fear and replaces it with cold, crystalline fury, because these men hurt her, terrorized her, used her as a pawn in their sick game of power and dominance. And whatever happens in the next few minutes, I am going to make sure she survives this even if I don't. Dmitry Kozlov is exactly what I expected, and somehow worse. A thick-bodied man in his 50s, with dead shark eyes, and a smile that makes my skin crawl, flanked by at least a dozen armed men who fan out around the warehouse in strategic positions that suggest this is a trap, that they never intended to honor any trade, that Dante was right about Kozlov wanting to humiliate him by forcing an impossible choice. Volkov, Kozlov says in heavily accented English, his voice carrying across the cavernous space like he's announcing himself at a party instead of preparing for murder. You actually came, brought your little dentist whore like a good dog, and now we see what kind of man you really are, yes? We see if you choose your woman or your empire, if you have become soft like I always suspected, if the great Dante Volkov has finally found a weakness I can exploit until there is nothing left of you but broken pieces and regret. I feel Dante tense beside me, feel the violence coiled in his body like a spring wound too tight. But his voice when he speaks is ice cold and utterly controlled, revealing nothing of the rage I know is churning beneath his careful composure. You have something I want. I have something you want. So let's make this simple, Dmitri. Release the girl, take Dr. Reeves, and I'll withdraw from the Brooklyn territories like you demanded. No resistance, no retaliation, clean break. And you can claim your victory to whoever is stupid enough to believe you actually won anything here today. The words taste like lies, even from across the distance between us. And I know that Dante has no intention of letting any of this play out the way Kozlov expects. That every word is calculation and misdirection, that somewhere in the shadows Victor and whoever else Dante brought are moving into position for whatever comes next. Kozlov laughs, a wet, unpleasant sound that makes me think of rot and corruption, and he walks over to Emily with leisurely confidence, pulling a gun from his waistband with casual ease that suggests he's done this 1,000 times before, that human life means nothing to him beyond its utility as leverage or message or warning. You think I am stupid? He asks, and there's genuine amusement in his voice, genuine delight at whatever he thinks he's accomplished here. You think I bring you here for trade? No, I bring you here to teach lesson, to show what happens when Dante Volkov thinks he can care about someone, thinks he can have normal life with normal woman while building empire on blood and bones of his enemies. He points the gun at Emily's shoulder, casual as anything, and pulls the trigger before I can even process what's happening, the gunshot impossibly loud in the enclosed space. And Emily screams, a sound of pure agony that will haunt my nightmares forever. And I'm moving before I can think, before I can remember the plan, or my promise to Dante or anything, except that my sister is bleeding, and this man just shot her, and I am going to kill him or die trying. Everything happens so fast after that. Chaos erupting like a dam breaking, gunfire and shouting, and the sound of bodies hitting concrete. And I'm running toward Kozlov with some kind of primal fury driving my legs. And he's turning toward me with surprise in his dead eyes, because he didn't expect this. Didn't expect the quiet dentist to become something feral and dangerous when her family is threatened, and his gun is swinging toward me, but I'm already diving for his legs, already tackling him with all the force my 130 pounds can generate. And we hit the ground together in a tangle of limbs and violence. His gun goes skittering across the concrete floor, and I'm scrambling for it with hands that are suddenly steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my system, despite the sounds of the firefight happening around us, as Dante's men engage Kozlov's soldiers, in the kind of brutal close-quarters combat I've only seen in movies. And my fingers close around cold metal, just as Kozlov's hand closes around my ankle, yanking me backward with enough force to make my chin crack against the concrete and fill my mouth with the copper taste of blood. But I'm not letting go of the gun. I'm not releasing this one chance to end the man who hurt Emily, who threatened everything I love, who represents every bit of corruption and violence and callous disregard for human life that I've been swimming in for the past week. And I'm rolling over and pointing the weapon at his face with hands that don't shake at all, with the kind of cold certainty that comes from crossing a line you can never uncross, from making a choice that changes who you are fundamentally and irrevocably. You weren't supposed to. I hear Dante's voice somewhere behind me, rough with something that might be fear, or might be pride, or might be horror at what I'm about to do. But I can't stop now. Can't hesitate. Can't second-guess this moment because Kozlov is already reaching for another weapon hidden in his jacket. And if I don't pull this trigger right now, my sister dies. I die. Maybe Dante dies. And I refuse to let this man take anything else from me. The gun kicks in my hands when I fire, the recoil stronger than I expected from something that looks so small and insignificant. And Kozlov's head snaps back and he falls and there's blood. So much blood, spreading across the concrete in a dark pool that I can't look away from even though I want to, even though some part of my brain is screaming that I just killed someone, that I just took a human life, that nothing will ever be the same after this. The warehouse goes quiet except for the ringing in my ears. And then Dante is there, pulling me up from the ground and checking me for injuries with hands that are shaking almost as badly as mine are starting to. And his face is doing something complicated, cycling through relief and fury and something that looks almost like awe. And he's saying my name over and over like a prayer, or a curse, or maybe both. "You shot him," he says. And it's not a question or an accusation, just a statement of observable fact. Just an acknowledgement that I crossed the line from his world into mine, that I became something other than the innocent dentist who treated his wounds that first night. "You weren't supposed to do that. You were supposed to let me handle it. But you shot him and now—" He breaks off, searching my face for something, maybe looking for signs of trauma or regret or breakdown. But what he finds instead is just grim determination because Emily is still bleeding and still tied to that chair. And I don't have time to process what I just did. Don't have the luxury of falling apart when my sister needs me. "Emily?" I say, and my voice sounds strange and distant but functional. And I'm pushing past Dante and running to where she's slumped in the chair. Her shoulder bleeding, but not arterial, thank God. Not immediately life-threatening if we can get her medical attention soon. And I'm using the knife Victor hands me to cut through her restraints, while talking to her in the soothing voice I use with frightened patience, telling her she's going to be okay, telling her it's over, telling her I'm here and I'm sorry and I love her, and everything is going to be fine even though I don't know if any of that is true. Dante makes a phone call in rapid Russian, and suddenly there are more people. Medics who treat Emily's wound with professional efficiency. Men who start cleaning up the bodies and the evidence with the kind of practiced ease that suggests this isn't their first warehouse massacre. And through it all, Dante stays close to me. A solid presence at my back. Not touching, but near enough that I can feel him. Can draw strength from his proximity, even as my hands start shaking with delayed reaction and my mind starts trying to process the magnitude of what just happened, what I just did. 6 months later, I'm standing in my practice again, seeing patients and fixing teeth and having boring conversations about flossing techniques. Except now there's bulletproof glass in my windows and armed security in the waiting room, and a picture on my desk of me and Emily taken last weekend when she came to visit from Boston, where she returned to school after 3 weeks of recovery and intensive therapy that I paid for with money that came from sources I don't ask about and don't want to know about. Dante legitimized portions of his business: real estate, imports, a few restaurants and clubs that actually operate legally. Though we both know he'll never be completely clean, never be the kind of man you bring home to meet the family, except I already did that with Emily. And after an awkward dinner where my sister interrogated him about his intentions, and his criminal activities, and his plans for keeping me safe, She grudgingly admitted that she could see why I fell for him, could understand that sometimes good people do bad things for complicated reasons, could accept that her sister's boyfriend is a former mob boss who still has dangerous enemies, but who also looks at me like I'm the only light in his darkness. We live in that same penthouse where I first learned to play piano under his patient instruction, where we cook dinner together and argue about Dostoevsky and make love like we're trying to prove we're alive, that we survived, that we get to have this against all odds and despite all logic. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night with the memory of Kozlov's blood on my hands and the weight of what I became in that warehouse pressing down on my chest, Dante is there, pulling me close and reminding me that I am not defined by one moment of violence, that I am still the good person I always was, just one who learned that protecting the people you love sometimes requires you to become something you never thought you could be. I chose him that night when I pulled the trigger, chose this life of beautiful darkness and dangerous love, chose to be the queen who stands beside the king instead of the innocent bystander who pretends she doesn't see the blood on his crown. And every day I make that choice again. Every morning I wake up and decide that this impossible love is worth the cost, worth the danger, worth the transformation from dentist to something fiercer and more complicated than I ever imagined becoming. The FBI agent who approached me last month about turning state's evidence, about testifying against Dante in exchange for immunity and protection and a fresh start somewhere far from New York, I looked at him across the coffee shop table and smiled the way I imagine queens smile at men who don't understand power, who don't comprehend that some bonds are forged in fire and blood and can't be broken by offers of safety or promises of justice. And I told him with perfect composure that he must have me confused with someone else, that I'm just a dentist who runs a small practice in Brooklyn and has absolutely nothing to offer the federal government in their ongoing investigations. In the world of crowns and serpents, in the empire Dante built from violence and loss and his own dark brilliance, I found a place I never knew existed, found a version of myself I never knew was possible, became the woman who chose danger over safety, who chose love over morality, who chose to stand in the darkness beside a monster who became my man. And I regret nothing. More nothing except the innocence I can never reclaim. And when I look at myself in the mirror now, I see someone stronger, fiercer, more alive than the careful woman who existed before a bleeding stranger walked into her practice and changed everything. And I think maybe that's what love does sometimes. It doesn't complete you or fix you or make you whole. It transforms you into something entirely new, something dangerous and powerful and capable of surviving anything as long as you're facing it together.